Welcome back, everyone, to part 2 of my video games in cinema series, where I look into the past, present, and future of video game movie adaptations. Look, I know it's been quite a while since the first part of this video, but this one took a lot more time to prepare, and I honestly wasn't working on it as regularly as I should have been. But that doesn't matter, we're here now, and that's what's important. So, while this is a quote-unquote part 2 in a series, you don't really need to see the first one. It'd be real nice if you did, though. You want to be nice to me, don't you? But, on the off chance that this is the only one you're going to watch, and you don't want to go and watch the first one, let me give a real quick rundown of the first video, because it's been a while for everyone, including the people who've actually seen it. So, back in part 1 of this video games in cinema series, we looked into the past of the video game movies and talked about basically all of them that have existed to this point. It was a real rough do's and don'ts of adapting a video game property, and there was quite a lot to go through. But we're not here to talk about that video anymore. We're here to talk about the long-awaited, long-rumored part 2. The present day of video game movies. So what exactly do I mean by present day? Well, to put it simply, I'm just going to talk about every video game movie that's in some level of production, and get into which I think might actually happen and which I don't think will happen, and maybe what fans might want to see out of movies in production. After arguably too much digging, I found a total of 52 movies in production that are based off a video game of some kind. And I'm almost positive that with the amount I've added through making this video, that number isn't even 52 anymore. And I'm frankly too lazy to count how many I've added. Now, I'm sure there are even more than that. Probably some movies people are keeping tight-lipped about, and I'm sure there's a dozen more in production in foreign markets, and foreign news is a little harder to dig through when I barely speak English as it is. Now, what did I do to come up with my definition of quote-unquote in production? Well, basically, I looked for someone credible at one point or another saying, yeah, that's a thing we're doing, or anything else that's, similar to that. Which, because my definition is so loose, is the reason why that number I have is so high. Do I think we will see 50-some video game movies come out? No, it's not likely. Some of them would be a real stretch to turn into a film. But, hey, sometimes that worked out. I mean, look at Rampage. I would have never guessed they would turn that one into a movie. And it worked pretty well. So I know what you're thinking. Colin, you've wet my whistle. Tell me what these potential movies are. I'm literally dying to find out. Well, don't you worry. We'll get into them in a minute. But before we talk about the ones that have some potential of actually happening, I want to start this video off by talking about the ones that I'll say probably aren't going to happen. And despite any official word of cancellation, it's safe to say they've probably been shelved. If you check in on movie and gaming news as much as I do, there's an amount of time where hearing nothing from a project, it's safe to assume that it's probably not in the works anymore. And for the sake of this video, I'm using a pretty generous 2.5 years of no news to assume it's a dead project. Now, before I get into the first part of this list, I'll just say, making a list like this, I'm likely to be very wrong, because I'm only using my best judgment, and my best judgment is shaky at the best of times. Way back in the distant years of 2006, and yours truly was just starting high school, if you can believe it from my still baby voice. That's not all that was going on in that year, though. 2006 marks the year that New Line Cinema, optioned the rights for the film adaptation of Heavy Rain. Now, if you know anything about that game, it's a pretty solid choice for a movie, as it's heavily narrative driven, something pretty rare at the time, or at least in my memory it was. It's hard to say, I was still pretty young. Now, I hear the gaming historians yelling from the rooftops, "Colin, you've got your dates wrong. Heavy Rain came out in 2010, not 2006. Well, yeah, you're right. It did. Which is what makes this story so interesting to me. I've never once seen the film rights bought up for something so early in development. New Line Cinema saw nothing more than a tech demo at E3 2006, featuring nothing from the final product of the game, other than, I think, Ethan's Kitchen. It's been a while since I've seen it, so I don't totally remember. If you're curious, I'll link it in the description, because it was kind of a neat watch. Jump way forward to early 2011, just shy of less than a year after the game's eventual release. We finally get word that the film has been picked up officially, and will be adapted by David Milch, who created NYPD Blue and Deadwood, and the project was being fast-tracked. Now, I know that quote-unquote fast doesn't have an exact speed, but I think it's faster than not a peep of news in 8 years. For me, it's honestly a shame this one isn't gonna happen. I liked Heavy Rain quite a bit, and I'm not saying it would have lit the world on fire like a Star Wars, but it had potential to be like the next Gone Girl. I hope this one still happens someday. Despite being only the second game on this list, we're already at what to me is one of the oddest choices of game to pick to adapt into a movie. And that's The Sims. Back in 2007, well into not seeing what a crazy success the series would eventually become, Hollywood thought we needed a movie of The Sims. Personally, when I heard this, when I was researching this video, because I certainly did not hear about it at the time, I thought it was a dumb idea, honestly. But after some digging around and finding what is probably the only interview that has ever taken place about this movie, I found a plot synopsis, and I can't say it would be good, but it takes the idea in a way that I wouldn't have guessed. Basically, the idea was two kids find a weird game in a store because, of course, called The Sims Infinity Pack. And basically it would be revealed that what the kids are doing in the game was affecting their world. Honestly, that could have been alright, but we haven't heard from the movie in 10 years, so this one isn't coming out. While I wouldn't say Devil May Cry was at the peak of its popularity in 2011, we were a few years past the release of DMC4, and we've seen some trailers at this point for the reboot, which was mixed reception to be positive. But that didn't stop the powers that be to kick the movie right into gear. At the time, the movie was said to be based off of the upcoming reboot of the series, which really no one would have wanted because that Dante wasn't iconic yet. And, well, now that we're going back, he's still not. Now currently in 2018, with the announcement of Devil May Cry and the return to the original series, it's pretty clear that any potential film that would come out of the DMC franchise would probably be based off this universe. Screen Gems bought the rights to the film, and for anyone who's curious about that company, they're the people who did all the Resident Evil movies, so it makes sense because Capcom. So they at least kind of knew what they were doing. But even though I'm kind of a fan of the franchise, we haven't heard news in it in 7 years, so it's not likely we'll see this happen. Personally, I'm not even sure film is the right medium for the Devil May Cry story. While it wasn't super well received, Devil May Cry did have that anime about a decade back, and I thought that was pretty alright, and that might be more the line you'd want to take a series like this. widely loved sci-fi series Mass Effect would be a prime target for film adaptations, especially back in 2010 when Legendary acquired the rights. Writers and producers were brought on board, and even several higher-ups over at BioWare had agreed to work on the movie as technical advisors. Since then, the writer has dropped out, admitting he wasn't sure how to condense such a massive game into a single film, and even Warner Brothers had stepped away in order to pursue a partnership with DC Comics, and we know how that turned out. Even though Legendary has since hooked up with the Universal Pictures to work on the Mass Effect movie, even that was all the way back in 2013. It's a shame. Given the time frame, had this gone forward back when it was originally planned, it could have been a real Star Wars competitor as far as high-budget sci-fi films go. The one real issue with mobile games is that because they're free and on a device that everyone under the sun owns, it gives the illusion that a game is some highly beloved thing when 8 trillion people download it. Or at least that's what Warner Brothers thought when in 2013 they were in talks to make a Temple Run movie. I mean, I can't lie, I've played the game, but does running on a path, jumping over the odd hole, really warrant getting a movie? I don't really think so either, but not hearing anything from them in 5 years, I think Warner Brothers came to the same conclusion. What do you get when you combine Bruce Willis, Jamie Foxx, Gerard Butler, and Vin Diesel? Honestly, I'm not really sure what you would get combining all those things together, but one thing it certainly doesn't make is a Kane and Lynch movie. Backtrack about 10 years ago, shortly after the release of the original Kane and Lynch game, a movie wasn't just greenlit, it had a mostly finished script, and Bruce Willis and Jamie Foxx had signed on to star as the titular characters. After an initial report of the film being delayed a few years, mysteriously the word on the street was now that the movie had a new script, a new director, and a completely different cast, now starring Gerard Butler and Vin Diesel, in what many people would have considered the peak of each of these actors' careers. But it's been 5 years now, and I'm not sure how many people even remember the Kane and Lynch games at this point. I think the time for this movie has passed. But hey, you never know. I would have said the same thing about Rampage. And I'm really sorry I keep picking on Rampage, that one still kind of baffles me. Coming off of a successful soft reboot of the franchise, it didn't really surprise many people to hear that in 2012, Eidos Montreal had teamed up with CBS Films to make Deus Ex: Human Defiance, a live-action movie with a completely original story set around the same time as the most recent game, Human Revolution. 2 years later, they announced that the movie is being completely rewritten, written by Michael Finch this time, at the time Predators fame, if you can call Predators fame, and who would, interestingly enough, after the project seemingly faded away, he went on to write the screenplay for Hitman Agent 47, which, if you want to hear about that movie, go back and watch the first video in the series, because that's where I talked about it. As much as it looks like this project is kinda dead, I would have liked to seen a Deus Ex movie. While I've never been a huge fan of the games, I like the world, I like the robot techie stuff, I don't really know what to call it, but it's cool. Coming off the first God of War game back in 2005, David Jaffe had confirmed that a script had indeed been completed and had been handed over to Universal Studios. It looked like we were getting a God of War movie. A whole 5 years later, in 2010, and all we've heard was on and off again word that Brett Ratner was signed up to direct the movie. In interviews that same year with Stig Amusen, the game director of God of War 3, he stated he knew nothing of the movie and stated he had zero control over it anyway. Another interview that same year, David Jaffe, the guy who talked about the movie originally, he bluntly stated that he doubted this movie would ever see the light of day. 2 years later, we hear Daniel Craig, of all people, will be playing Kratos, and that a new screenplay was being adapted by the duo that wrote the screenplays for several of the Saw movies. Not exactly the same type of material to adapt, but hey, who knows, maybe they were fans of the series. Now it's been 6 years and we've heard nothing since. But I don't think this is the end of a God of War movie. Not with just how overwhelmingly successful this new installment of the franchise has been. I would not at all be surprised to see if things change to fit more in line with this new game and have a movie based off this instead. It's something even the game director, Cory Barlog, has also been interested in seeing. Ubisoft is no stranger to making a foray into the movie business, but back in 2013, that was significantly less true. However, it's back then when they announced a Ghost Recon movie, which, it being a Tom Clancy's property, I'm kind of stretching the definition of video game adaptation, as all of the Ghost Recon games are technically based off books first. So when this was announced, Michael Bay was signed on to both produce and direct the film. But again, no word in years, and Bay's next several projects are already well on their way, and there's not even a whisper of a Ghost Recon movie. It's fair to say, it too has gone ghost. And I will not apologize for making such a terrible joke. Originally announced all the way back in 2009, someone, somewhere thought, hey, the kids love video games, so let's make a movie out of one of the originals. No, I'm not talking about Pong, because that's stretching things a little too much. I'm talking about a movie adaptation of the arcade classic Asteroids. With literally nothing in that game other than a ship that shoots space rocks, that was really hard to say, that took me like 12 takes and I'm not kidding. You could pretty much do whatever you wanted with this property. But things went dark, and I don't see this movie coming back to life. Except, oh wait, it did. In 2015, they had announced that the script had been getting a complete rewrite. And then it died again because we haven't heard a word since. But this movie has come back from the dead once, so it could do it again. Another arcade classic that there were whispers of a movie of was Spy Hunter. A game I'll admit I really am not familiar with and don't know a thing about it, and have never heard of, but much like Asteroids or any other arcade classic you're going to try and adapt, it had a rocky couple of years, and again, it's been years since we've heard anything. I don't think we'll see a Spy Hunter movie. Wow! That was a lot longer than I had intended it to be, because that's only part 1 of this part 2 series. Originally, I was just going to put up a boring list of every movie one after another, but as I dug around, I found the little production backstories kind of interesting. And I hope you did too, because, well, it's almost 20 minutes into this video, and if they weren't, I'm sorry. Doing a real deep dive on each and every one of these movies made me change my opinion on a few of them on whether or not I think they'll come out, even if there's a lack of evidence to prove it in some cases. But now that we've dealt with, for all intents and purposes, the dead and forgotten movie productions, I think it's time we move on to the movies that I think are actually going to come out. You know, probably the whole reason you're watching this in the first place, so like a genius I stuck it 20 minutes into a video. I'm sure anyone watching this video knows about some video game movies that are coming out, but we're not going to be talking about those ones. Not yet. Because those few are locked down and are pretty unlikely that anything stops them from coming out at this point. We're going to be digging into a little more nebulous news, with things that have either been announced recently enough, or that I can't in good faith consider them cancelled, or there is enough solid information on the production that I don't think it's been cancelled. And just like that last bit, we're basically going to be continuing in chronological order, even though I don't think I actually stated that the last set of videos was in chronological order. Basically, it just means I can tag new things on at the end, because ever since I started working on this video, several movies have been announced, making my life and making this video even harder. Because it's been hard to track down exact dates for a lot of these, they're basically just in order of the year, not so much the month in the year. Not that how I order these is all that important, just that they're in the video. Everyone these days knows about Illumination's Minions. Well, significantly less people know about Ubisoft's Raving Rabbids, which is a weird thing to say because they too are pretty well known, especially with the whole Mario and Rabbids Kingdom Battle having just come out last year. But back in 2014, which I get is longer ago than the arbitrary cutoff date I gave myself for this video, it was announced that famed robot chicken studio Stupid Buddy Studios, along with Ubisoft Motion Pictures and Sony Pictures, they were going to be making a Rabbids movie. Now, 4 years with no news is a long time, but since then, the Rabbids have had a successful TV series, successful games, and the whole world seems to have gotten Minion fever, so I don't think it's the end of this movie. I think it could still happen. The companies Stories International, Circle of Confusing, and Sega have seemingly teamed together to adapt several of Sega's properties. Now, the information I found just says film and television, but doesn't list which is going to which. So for the sake of this video, I'm just going to name them all, because I don't know which is going to be which. Currently, or at least as of 2 years ago, they're working on adapting various titles such as Altered Beast, Crazy Taxi, Golden Axe, House of the Dead, Shinobi, Streets of Rage, and Virtua Fighter. A noble effort to announce so many projects at once. If I could pick one of these to vouch for, it would probably be Altered Beast, because it doesn't really have much today to compare it to, so it would be a little fresher than some of those other properties. Deadpool Fury Road, but with more lasers and a whole bunch of rockets. Or at least that's how I would pitch to investors a Borderlands movie to someone who knew nothing about the franchise. A basically unknown writer has been tasked with writing the script. Honestly, it would make more sense to involve the game's writer, as the writing in the game is a huge part into why this series has been so successful, but all we've really been told about the movie outside of that is that it would be R-rated, because R-rated seems to be a buzzword these days. I'm guessing this is currently dead, but I think if a much rumored Borderlands 3 were to show its head, I think it could easily spark this movie into production. Emmett Furla Oasis Films, a company that you probably haven't heard of, but they're responsible for all of those action movies you'd see your dad watching on cable. They've teamed up with Atari to transform 2 arcade classics into the big screen. Those 2 games, Centipede and Missile Command. There is really no news on either of these projects so far, so it's really hard to say what's going to happen. But the thing with adapting an arcade game is there's so little source material, is you basically can just make whatever movie you want and then slap a video game title on it. So in that regard, these movies could come out. If you were told they're making a Dante's Inferno movie, there is not much better than you could do than to nab Fede Alvarez, the director of the Evil Dead remake and the more recent Don't Breathe. Now, I can barely count this one, because as the game fades farther and farther into obscurity, the director has basically come out and said, I'm gonna focus more on the poem instead of the game itself. But I'm not sure this will ever see the light of day, because when the game came out, it was pretty controversial. So I can imagine the movie would be even more so. While the gameplay of The Division isn't exactly my cup of tea, I actually enjoy the story and the setting. So hearing that the director of the first John Wick movie and Atomic Blonde, David Leitch, is attached to make a movie of The Division, it's safe to say it's in good hands, and I can't wait to hear more about this film production. Optioned basically back-to-back with a partnership of Ubisoft Motion Pictures and Sony Pictures are two more, Ubisoft titles. In this case, Far Cry and Watch Dogs respectively. Now, basically not much is known about either production. Far Cry is in a weird spot, as 10 years ago it already had the, to put it bluntly, very poor adaptation for a movie, and each game in the Far Cry series is its own little contained story, so which do you adapt? Far Cry 5 has the second largest launch in Ubisoft history, so I would say that is the strong candidate for this movie. But for myself, I'd like to see an adaptation of Far Cry 4, as it is my personal favorite of the series, though I'm a little biased because it's also the only one of them I've played. As far as Watch Dogs goes, the only thing we really heard was that Deadpool 1 and 2 screenwriters Paul Wernick and Rhett Reese were commissioned to write the screenplay. Now, that doesn't mean they'll be adapting the second game. However, Watch Dogs 2 had significantly more humor than the original game. So, while they might not do a complete adaptation of the second game, I think it's safe to say the movie would have that feel. One of 2016's surprisingly big hits was Campo Santo's Firewatch. And it wasn't just gamers that thought so. Film production company Good Universe thought so too. And they are officially partnering with Campo Santo to bring Firewatch to the big screen. If this happens, it will be a really nice success story to see such an indie darling reach such high heights. Despite what I had said earlier about mobile games, there is one on this list that I think is much more likely to come out than other mobile game adaptations. Mobile game smash hit Fruit Ninja might be getting a movie someday in the future. Currently, nothing more than studios have signed on and writers hired, but coming off a somewhat successful YouTube Red series, the adaptation might not be as far-fetched as you think. I'm not sure what the plan is for the movie, but the web series is kind of charming, and with over 26 million views on the first episode alone, someone is clearly enjoying this series, that's for sure. Back in 2013, J.J. Abrams and Gabe Newell shared the stage at DICE to announce a collaboration on making movies of some of Valve's properties, something you all probably remember, where they had mentioned Half-Life and Portal specifically. Other than that, we've heard nothing other than an interview with J.J. Abrams in 2016 stating that while both films are kind of on the back burner right now, they are still being worked on. And as both Abrams and Newell strike me as the type that won't let these potential films die, it might just be a while before we see them come to fruition. From the very first trailer of The Last of Us, it had fans clamoring for a movie adaptation. And less than a year after the game's initial release, it would seem fans were going to get their wish, as Neil Druckmann, writer and co-director of the game, had written a script, and Sam Raimi had signed on to produce it. A distributor had even been secured in Screen Gems. We've mentioned them before. And even read-throughs of the script with actors had begun. All was seemingly perfect. A little too perfect, it would seem. As quickly as our wishes were being granted, our nightmares too seemingly were coming true, as Druckmann and Raimi both stated that due to creative differences between Druckmann and Sony, the movie was officially at a standstill, and no update has been given since. Now, this is pure speculation, but given some of the struggles that the game had behind the scenes, I suspect Ellie was possibly given more of the spotlight in the movie, and Sony probably thought it would be safer for the film to star Joel. Well, y'all know why. I'm just not going to get into that. Film producer Michael DeLuca is doing what he can to adapt Metro 2033 into a movie. Now, before you say anything, yeah, I know it was a series of books first, but it's not a secret that the games are considerably more well-known than the series of books. DeLuca has stated wanting to make the film not too dissimilar from the likes of Mad Max and the Hunger Games, which, while I'm not super familiar with the Metro series, I've read about half of the first novel and played a few hours of the first game, and that series isn't remotely like either of those properties he listed, so that's not an encouraging start to this movie. That being said, if you're looking for funding, saying something like that is exactly how you get money thrown at you. However, the most interesting thing I dug up about this production was that the QA lead for Fairly Odd Parents Break Into Rules was brought on to pen the script, and I imagine that's one of the oddest things that you'll hear in this video. After an 8-minute proof-of-concept short film was released on YouTube by director Kevin Tetrowin back in 2010 titled Mortal Kombat Rebirth, the full-blown movie buzz began once again for the Mortal Kombat franchise. Originally, it was planned to be adapted by the same director of the well-received YouTube series Mortal Kombat Legacy, a series that I personally enjoyed. It was no surprise that shortly thereafter, New Line Cinema and Warner Bros. Announced that Tetrowin would indeed be directing a full-blown movie adaptation of Mortal Kombat. However, a few years later, he dropped out of this project to pursue other things, going on to work on several Marvel and DC television series. Then, James Wan was attached, but you don't have to look far to see what he went on to do instead, the millions and millions of dollars he's making doing horror movies. And once again, a few years later, landing us in 2016, the movie has found yet another director in Salmon McCoy. Nothing on the movie since, however, the Mortal Kombat franchise has been around for a long time, and I don't ever see it going away completely. So this movie, in my mind, could always happen, even if the current in-production version isn't the one that we get. Hot Tub Time Machine director Steve Pink is currently attached to direct and co-write a movie based off the Sega series Rent-A-Hero. A franchise, I'll admit, going into this video, I knew literally nothing about and had never even heard of it. Essentially, it's about a boy who somehow, while trying to order a pizza, accidentally receives some combat armor and now has to pay for it. So he dons the armor and becomes a Rent-A-Hero to try and make up the cash that he needs to pay for the armor. Now, to me, that sounds like a pretty cool idea. And in today's movie climate, if it's got a hero in it, it's gonna make you some money. Well, somehow there's a Tetris movie being made, and it's being called an epic sci-fi adventure. Reportedly so large that it already has potential to be a trilogy. A joint production between American and Chinese studios with producer Lawrence Kasanoff, of all people, the guy who was kind of responsible for the original 2 Mortal Kombat movies. He's attached to the project too. Well, I can't say that Tetris is the best game you could adapt into a movie, but you certainly can't find a much more recognizable property to adapt. In the first part of this series, I had mentioned a potential shared universe between several video game movie adaptations. While it may be a little too early to say for certain, the Thief adaptation is the least likely of this bunch to be made, at least in my opinion. Its most recent game was seen as a bit of a flop, and since the original meeting when they were first told about all of this shared universe stuff back in 2015, we haven't heard anyone talk about this specific movie, and that was a while ago now. Chinese production company Beijing Starlit Movie and TV Culture appears to be working on a live-action Contra movie. And it being a Chinese production, I've had a seriously hard time digging up any more info than that. However, I was able to find an official teaser for the movie online, but it's nothing more than an animated logo. But you wouldn't bother putting even that much work into something unless this project was planned to go somewhere. In 2007, it seemed for sure we were going to get a Gears of War movie. It had an experienced writer in Stuart Beattie attached, and Live Free or Die Hard director Len Wiseman was on board to direct what was supposed to be a prequel to the game franchise. 3 years later, we hadn't really received any noteworthy update, other than that the film's budget would be, quote, considerably cut back. From what, who knows, to what, no one knows. And with that, over the next few years, the names attached to the project slowly start to drop off and be replaced, and then drop off again, and replace again, and drop off again, and so on, up until 2017. When it seems they finally locked down Alien vs. Predator Requiem writer Shane Salerno, and the movie would no longer be attached to any of the games in the franchise, and instead be a completely new story set in the same universe. I think this is one of the safer routes to take with an adaptation, because you're not going to anger anyone for miscasting a character or missing a specific event they really wanted to see from one of the games. To celebrate its 30th anniversary last year, Capcom has announced that beloved franchise Mega Man is getting his own movie. While there have been numerous adaptations to the small screen, it seems the time has finally come to make the leap to the big screen. Director team Ariel Schulman and Henry Joost have signed on to helm the project, and Masi Oka is set to produce it. While I think it's a property best suited for animation, though I'm a little biased just because there's so many Mega Man cartoons out there, live action these days really just means you might see a real face and it's still covered head to toe in visual effects. So I'm excited to see what comes of this Mega Man movie. Despite the fact that this series doesn't have a plot, a unique world, or really anything about it that you could make a movie out of other than the title alone, there appears to be a Gran Turismo movie in the works over at Sony. I can't really blame them, the series does quite well for them. Writer-doer the Hober brothers are attached to write it, and Tron Legacy director Joseph Kosinski is set to helm the project. The only thing is, this was all back in 2015, and the only update since being in 2017, where they said, yeah, we're still working on it. While Observer might not be as much of a household name, it's the most recent game by the people who made Layers of Fear, and that is a game that probably sounds much more familiar. Observer got fantastic reviews, and so production company Zero Gravity has announced they will be adapting the game. I'd like to tell you more than that, but that's the only information I could dig out of the one article I could find. It also didn't help that the article was completely in Polish, and my Polish is pretty rusty. Hey, so you remember that whole video game shared universe thing they wanted to make that I talked about only a few movies ago? Well, this time I want to talk about the Just Cause movie specifically. Things seem to be going real smooth for this adaptation, more so than any of the others that I've already talked about. Which is a little weird because Just Cause isn't a huge franchise, even though the fourth one is coming out soon. Brad Peyton, a man no stranger to video game adaptations, as he's directed the 2018 Rampage movie, is currently signed on to be the director of the Just Cause movie. This is one of the only movies in this entire list that an actual role has been cast, as they've cast Aquaman himself, Jason Momoa, as the protagonist of the Just Cause series, Rico Rodriguez. We already have 6 live-action movies and 4 animated movies, making this easily the most successful video game film adaptation franchise there is. But, like everything else in Hollywood these days, it's time to reboot it. That's right, beloved horror franchise Resident Evil is getting another crack at the big screen. I mean, hey, they gave the game series a sort of soft reboot with Resident Evil 7, so why not the movies too? This time, however, Paul W.S. Anderson isn't attached. Now, it's the overseer of the Conjuring universe, James Wan, that will be taking the reins of Resident Evil. Now, I've complained in the past about sequels getting announced before the first film is even out. Well, in this case, they've announced 5 ahead of time. Yeah, that's right. There are 6 planned movies in this Resident Evil reboot. Now, I'm actually pretty on board with this, because while I do enjoy the Resident Evil movies, it's no secret that they weren't really based on the games, and they were really doing their own thing. So for a chance to see something that might possibly be a more direct adaptation, sign me up for that. Buckle up, folks, for it's time for yet another Ubisoft title adaptation. While I can't say how many of them are gonna come out, the company is at the very least clearly quite passionate about getting movies made. This time, one of video games' favorite secret agents is taking a stab at the big screen with this potential Splinter Cell movie. For a few years, the Bourne Identity director Doug Liman, someone who would have been perfect fit for the job, it seems pretty likely that he's dropped out from the project, as there have been many rumored replacements in the last few years, but nothing concrete yet. The only thing seemingly locked in for this movie is Tom Hardy has said he would love to be Sam Fisher. That is, if this movie actually gets to the filming stage, which currently seems rocky at best. Activision Blizzard has announced that they too are stepping up to bat in this cinematic universe game. Now, that sounds great, coming from a company that controls so many great game properties. But it's money that rules the roads these days, so it should come to no surprise that the franchise that they have planned to adapt is none other than Call of Duty. While many of the games are really no different than any other war movie out there, there are a good amount of Call of Duty titles that put enough of a spin on things that a movie could potentially work out and set themselves apart from the rest of the crowd. Duke Nukem is a property that I was pretty indifferent on them making a movie of. But just earlier this year, John Cena himself has officially signed on to play Duke. And I've never been more on board with something. But for now, I will keep my excitement at bay, as I recommend you do too, as despite Platinum Dunes having secured a lead actor, they haven't nabbed a director or a writer. So sadly, any Duke Nukem project that may come out will be many years from now. Back in 2014, there was a particular horror game that, despite its humble beginnings, quickly set the world on fire, spawning 5 sequels, 2 spin-offs, and even 3 novels. All of that in only a tiny 4-year period. So, surprise surprise, it's time to add a movie to that list as well. Now, I've said enough that you can probably guess what franchise I'm talking about, but just in case, I am of course talking about Five Nights at Freddy's. A game that, in case you know nothing about, it's basically creepy Chuck E. Cheese animatronics wanted to kill you. And there's something about dead kids in it too. But anyways, back to the movie. These days, if a horror movie is getting made, good chances are Blumhouse is involved. And it's no different for Five Nights at Freddy's, as it seems that Blumhouse is teaming up with accomplished film director Chris Columbus to bring this movie to life. But that's not all. Scott Cawthon, both creator of the series and writer of the novels, in August of 2018 said he had finished a script, or at least the first draft of one anyways, and that the movie is eyeing a 2020 release. Given that horror movies are relatively cheap to produce compared to other types of movies, and they typically rake in so much money, I bet for sure this one will come out in 2020. Despite my interest in the background stories of film production, there is luckily one movie's production backstory I'm not going to get into, because frankly, it is far too long and far too confusing. But that movie is the long talked about Metal Gear Solid movie. It's finally happening, and I kind of can't believe it. Partially because, well, I don't. Not yet anyways. All of the right people are currently on board: the original creator Hideo Kojima, Sony, a great writer in Derek Connolly, and a talented director / mega Metal Gear fan Jordan Vogt-Roberts. If The Greatest Showman had taught me anything, passion makes a fantastic film. So I truly believe that one day we will see this Metal Gear movie. This team is not going to let it die easily, and I think they're going to do a great job too. While there doesn't seem to be anyone behind the scenes currently attached to this movie, or at least none that I could dig up, that hasn't stopped actor and martial artist Donnie Yen from trying his best to will the Sleeping Dogs movie into existence. With so little to go on, I hesitated to even put this movie on the list, but only a few months ago, Donnie Yen had posted that the film was in motion. But there's really no telling what that means when I can't find anything else other than that sentence. When it comes to movie adaptations of video games, there are none more infamous, more terrible, more deserving of a second chance than Super Mario Bros. And it seems like they're finally going to be getting just that. As Nintendo, and more importantly Shigeru Miyamoto, has partnered with Illumination to bring the world an animated Mario movie. And coming off the huge success of Super Mario Odyssey, there is really no better time for this announcement. Not that it's ever a bad time to announce an animated Mario movie. Now, I can't say this movie is going to be good, but all the info we have certainly points in that direction. The only thing I know for sure is that it will be miles better than the '93 movie. Not that that's a really hard thing to do. The Uncharted series is something that has always been near and dear to me, and it's been compared to movies both as a compliment and an insult, basically since the first game came out in 2007. So to those unaware, it should come to no surprise that an Uncharted movie has been talked about / in production on and off again for almost a decade now. While never officially attached to the project in any way, Nathan Fillion had come so highly requested by fans that he was in serious consideration for the part of Nathan Drake. However, those dreams were laid to rest when Mark Funky Bunch Wahlberg had landed the role instead. From that point, for the next few years, we gain and lose writers, directors, and even cast members to the point where the film currently said to be in production is completely different. For what was originally planned as an adaptation of the first game in the series, well now, thanks to Night at the Museum director Sean Levy, is now being made into a prequel of the series starring Tom Holland as a younger Nathan Drake. Minecraft is one of the most successful video games of all time, and even the story mode games were a huge hit, so it was no surprise that the movie had an announced release date of May 24th, 2019. That's a date that's super close. When I first started this video, I thought for sure the Minecraft movie was a for sure thing. That was, of course, until August of this year, where co-writer and director Rob McElhenney dropped out and basically said the movie is certainly not hitting that date, and is even going all the way back to the writer's room. Could this be the end of a Minecraft movie? Sure, it could be, but I doubt it. The game is just too big for the powers that be to ignore how much money a Minecraft movie could rake in for them. For almost 6 years, it had been whispered that Paul W.S. Anderson, the guy who made all those Resident Evil movies, would be directing a Monster Hunter movie. And no one, myself included, thought this was gonna happen. I'll be honest, I didn't even catch wind of this movie existing until Mr. X Incorporated dropped their 2016 demo reel. While that might not be a tip-off to a lot of people, I knew that was the visual effects company that Paul W.S. Anderson had used in his other movies. So putting 2 and 2 together, something was happening right under all of our noses. So hidden, in fact, that the movie has started filming. Set photos are coming out, and I'd gamble that this might be the first time you're even hearing about it. Now, to any fans of the game out there, it sounds like this movie isn't going to be the adaptation you want, where the plot is said to focus around a United Nations military team falling into a portal and have to fight off monsters so they don't get back to Earth. That isn't Monster Hunter. But as unappealing as that may sound, this movie could still turn out great, or maybe so bad it's good. I don't know. Like I said before, I like those Resident Evil movies, even if they're kinda dumb. So if I got something that was kinda dumb out of this, I'd be happy. And finally, a film I get to give you the hottest and freshest news I could possibly give you, seeing as this particular adaptation was announced when I had basically finished writing the script for this video. Quote, "This film will explore a world on the brink of destruction, where the only hope is to unite through the universal language of dance. One might call it a dance revolution. A dance revolution." That's right. Coming seemingly out of nowhere, it sounds like we're getting a DDR movie. And frankly, if it just uses music from the games, for me this could be a real hoot, cause growing up I was one of those DDR kids you'd see at the arcade trying to impress people. It never worked. There is almost nothing to go off right now because it was just announced, but for me, in nostalgia, I'm gonna keep an eye on this. And so, at last, we've made it to the last batch of films in this video. Movies that are basically locked down, or so I thought, looking at you, Minecraft, because originally you were in this part of the video and not the earlier one. Not only do all of these movies have a release date, but all 3 of them are lined up to come out in 2019, so we might be looking at another year of the video game movie. Also, 2019 is coming up real fast, like creepy fast, because right now, as I'm recording this, it's November and yesterday felt like May to me, so 2019 is going to be over sometime next week. First up, out May 10th, 2019, so we should probably be getting a trailer before too long now that I think about it. Everyone's favorite yellow mouse is getting a movie. Pokemon Detective Pikachu. I really don't know a ton about this movie other than Ryan Reynolds as a talking Pikachu solves crime. and frankly, if that doesn't get you to tune into a movie, you might need to reevaluate your life. A few months after that, on September 2nd, 2019, we're going to be getting the follow-up to the Angry Birds movie with the currently cleverly titled Angry Birds 2. Now, I talked about the first movie in my last video, and I liked it. Maybe it was a little generic, but for the most part, a fun movie. So getting more of that, you won't hear me complain about it. And finally, currently scheduled for a November 8th, 2019 release, the Blue Blur himself is coming to the big screen with the live-action / animated hybrid movie Sonic the Hedgehog. I've personally never been a big Sonic fan, but I'm glad this movie is finally happening, as I guess they've been trying to get one to happen for almost 20 years. And I can't think of a video game character more deserving of getting the big screen treatment than Sonic. He's certainly put in his fair share of work over the years. And well, that's it. That's all of them. That's every single video game movie adaptation in development. I'm sure you're happy to hear some of those, and maybe less happy to hear some other ones. But I'm not the guy in charge of what does and doesn't happen. I'm just trying to tell all of you about it. Personally, I'm curious to see what the future holds. There are so many fantastic stories told throughout video game history that I would love to experience again on the big screen. Honestly, I feel like I should have a longer conclusion, but I've also been talking for a really long time. So let me just say that at some point in the future, there is going to be a part 3 to this series. And that's going to be a lot of fun, because it's more centered on me nerding out as opposed to me doing what essentially was a research project. So look forward to that at some point. And as slow as I may have been putting this video together, I did have a lot of fun doing it. And of course, I hope you had fun listening to it. These aren't the types of things that I usually make, but when I get a good enough idea, or someone gives me a really good idea, I do like making these more long content projects. But if you weren't so much interested in what I was saying and just like to hear my dulcet tones, I do a ton of Let's Plays on this channel. I'm not the most regular person with uploading them, but I've done a lot, so if you want to hear me talk, there's a ton of me talking. Oh, and I have a podcast too. Kind of. I go months without uploading a new episode, but it is something I've been getting an itch to go back to soonish, if podcasts are your kind of thing. Now, I'm not super comfortable with asking for the whole like, comment, and subscribe thing, but I'm going to make an exception. I worked really hard on this video, even if it might not necessarily show. So if you liked it, like the video, write a comment, let me know. If you see me out in the world, tell me, hey, I liked that video, because it'd make me feel good. Honestly, even if you just clicked on the video and watched it for like a minute, it really means a lot to me, so thank you.